Ευλογητός η Χριστέ ο Θεός ημών, ο πανσόφους τους αλείς αναδείξας, καταπέμψας αυτής το πνεύμα το Άγιον και δι' αυτόν την οικουμένης αγινεύσας, φιλάνθρωπε δόξα σοι. So, last time we finished at chapter 11. So we finished the Tower of Babel, and then the last part of chapter 11 was the genealogy leading down all the way to Abraham, who is not yet called Abraham, he's called Abram, because Abraham was the name that God gave him later after having established his covenant with him. And so, from the beginning of creation, God appoints Adam to be the king, if you like, and the priest over creation. And Adam falls, and the fall continues all the way to the flood, and then God makes the flood take away all of the everybody on the earth and starts anew. He recreates, in other words. And now God has whittled it down to one person and one family through which salvation will come not only to a particular people but to the whole world. So we start at the beginning of chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your kindred and from your father's house, to make a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and in you all the tribes of the earth shall be blessed." Firstly, I'd like to address a few things. I have a bit of a problem, you see, with reading huge amounts of writing and then breaking it down. So I have to do it in pieces. Notice there's a section here where God says to Abram that I will bless you and I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. This is misused a lot today, and you get people who've never read the Bible in their lives, and they think that this applies to Israel. And they say, well, didn't God say in the Bible that he will bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse Israel? No, he didn't say that. He said that he will bless those who bless Abraham, and he will curse those who curse Abraham. And firstly is when we read the scriptures, Israel is not a nation state as it exists today. Israel is the people of God. And as we see in the New Testament, the Israel of God is, according to the Apostle Paul himself in his epistle to the Galatians, is the church. So the Israel was not just about the descendants of Abraham according to the flesh. It was about those who inherited the promise of Abraham, which was the promise of the Messiah. And so when we read the Psalms and the Old Testament readings and everything in the church services, when we hear Israel, all of the promises that were given to Israel in the Old Testament apply now to us as Christians, and more specifically us who belong to the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Orthodox Christians, because there is only one church. The fathers speak about God's call to Abram Abraham or Abram as he's known here, because he calls him out of the land of his fathers. And the fathers speak about this because every Christian is called out of the world, and is called not to be a part of the world, but to be apart as in separate from the world. And of course the pattern of Christian life, the most exemplary Christian life, is the monastic life. And so this is seen most clearly in the monastic life. Those who leave their homes, their families and their inheritance, etc., and dedicate their lives entirely to God. But this call is not only for monks and nuns, but is for all Christians, to not be a part of the world, to be in the world but not of the world. Then Abram departed as the Lord said to him, and Lot went with him. Lot was the nephew of Abraham. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Haran is where Abraham was from, and Haran is now in modern-day Iraq. So Abram took Sarai his wife, who will later be called Sarah, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions, and every soul they acquired in Haran, and they departed for the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the oak of Moreh, and the Canaanites were then in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your seed I will give this land." And there Abram built an altar to the Lord who appeared to him. So he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. So the Lord appears to Abram. Now, we've already seen God appearing further back in Genesis. But you'll notice that now with the story of Abraham, God is constantly appearing to his people and to Abraham and to his descendants. And so we have something to grapple with here. One is that God cannot be seen, which we see in the St. John says. He says in the opening of his gospel, he says, "No one has seen God at any time, but the only begotten one has revealed him." So we have verses that say God cannot be seen, and we have verses where the Lord, the divine name, Yahweh, which is what it is here, is appearing to his people. So what do we make of this? Well, firstly is every appearance of God in the Old Testament is an appearance of the pre-incarnate Son. So you'll see that it says the word of the Lord appeared to Abram, or the angel of the Lord appeared to Abram. And you'll see that the word and the angel of the Lord acts, speaks, and does everything that God does, and holds divine prerogatives. And so these are appearances of Christ prior to the incarnation. Secondly, there is a difference in Orthodox theology, and I won't go into too much detail because we'd be here forever, but there is a difference between the divine essence and the divine energies. So God's essence, or nature in other words, but let's use the term essence for now. The divine essence is unknowable to man, to creation, and it's incommunicable, as in it can't be communicated to creation. Whereas the divine energies, which are God himself, are knowable and communicable to creation. So whenever we see God appearing in the Old Testament, we're seeing the divine energies of God manifested. And as I say, the divine energies are uncreated. They're not like they're not created. They're not, as the errors of the papists would say, created grace, and so, something. Because this is the same divine energies that was seen when Christ was transfigured on Mount Tabor in the Transfiguration. And so it's something which is part of God Himself, and it is God Himself, and it's uncreated. So the Lord appeared to Abraham and told him where to go, and it says that Abraham, he set up a tent at a place called Bethel. Bethel in Hebrew means house of God, and so he built an altar at which to call upon the name of the Lord. And so again we see all the way through the Old Testament that God's people build altars to Him. So when we see some so-called form of Christianity without altars, without priesthood, without sacrifice, this is a break with the tradition. This is not in keeping with the Abrahamic tradition. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. So it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, "Indeed I know you are a beautiful woman. Therefore it will happen, when the Egyptians see you, so they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me. But they will let you live. Therefore say, 'You are my sister,' that it may be well with me for your sake, and I may live because of you." Egypt in Scripture is always a symbol of sin, and of the sort of the realm of sin. And so it always, not just geographically, but it's also theological when it says that Abram went down to Egypt. It's saying he descended into the realm of sin. And so whenever you hear Egypt in the Scriptures, have in mind that this is a spiritual and theological meaning. And so we're going to see here what happens with Abram and his wife in Egypt. So it was that when Abram came unto Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commanded her to Pharaoh. Then the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. Now he treated Abram well for her sake, and gave him sheep, oxen, donkeys, male and female servants, mules and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister'? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here is your wife, take her and go your own way." So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning Abram, and sent them away with his wife and all that he had. And the fathers, they don't really comment much on this episode, apart from they say that Abram's faith was incomplete because he was willing to give up his lawful wife that God had given him, and because he feared for his life, and so this is an instance of the people of even the righteous and the patriarchs of the Old Testament not being. They weren't like Christ, who was to come later. Christ, who came later, is completely different. He was a sinless man, a sinless human being, because he was God. But all of the Old Testament people, no matter how righteous or how good they were sinners. And so we see that Abram's faith was weak, and he was willing to give his wife, in fact, in essence, commit some sort of act of adultery, not himself, but give his wife in an adulterous relationship in fear of his life. And we see that God's providence saves him from this, and he plagues Pharaoh's house until Pharaoh gives him his wife back, and sends him away. Beginning at chapter 13. Now Abram went up from Egypt to the south, he and his wife and all he had, and Lot with him. Abram was very rich in cattle, silver and gold. So he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent was at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar he made there at the beginning. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. So wherever he stops, he calls upon the name of the Lord, just as every believer, every Christian, whenever they stop in a place, whether they're travelling with it, calls upon the name of God. Is to have God always before them, as Saint Pachomius said famously. He says we must always have the remembrance of God and the remembrance of God and the remembrance of His will and what's written in the Scriptures, etc., as always before our eyes. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, but the land was not able to support them, so they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great they could not dwell together. So strife arose between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and those of Lot. Now the Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelt in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left." The fathers mentioned that Abram is showing a level of righteousness here because he's not attached to earthly goods. As he's saying, Lot can choose as he wishes, and I will take whatever is left. We'll see Lot, he does sort of the opposite, and that's what gets him into trouble later on. Thus Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered and everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of God, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Then Lot chose all the plain of Jordan for himself and journeyed east. So they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, but Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. And then it says, "Now the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful before God." So Lot, as the fathers say, chose with the eyes of his flesh, in other words, with fleshly eyes, with his desire, and that's why he ended up, even though the place looked well watered and beautiful and good for livestock and good for his economic gain, etc., but it turns out to be a place of great wickedness. And so it's the same with us when we choose something because of our passions. And in fact, when I had a quick read of this earlier, I thought of something which is quite relevant for a lot of people. Is that the same thing happens when people look to get married? Is they look at appearances only, and they don't look at the deeper spiritual inner disposition of a person. And this is what ends up destroying a relationship later on. And it's basically the same thing. Lot, he looked at the place which looked nice and it was attractive to him, as I say, according to his fleshly eyes, but it ended up being the land of Sodom, which was a land of great wickedness, which God later had to destroy because it was such a wicked place. And anyway, we'll get to the story of Sodom later on, and so we'll talk about it then. Then God said to Abram, after Lot separated from him, "Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward and westward. For all the land you see I will give you and your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your seed also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the oak of Mamre in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. So we see this promise, which is now being consistently given to Abraham, and it will be given in a formal context later, that God will make him a great nation, and that, as we said in the previous, that all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. And of course, this has a Christological fulfillment. All of the nations of the earth being blessed through Abraham is then being blessed through Christ, who is the seed of Abraham. And that's why Matthew's Gospel begins, which we will read actually the Sunday before Christmas. We read the Sunday before Christmas. We read the genealogy all the way from Abraham all the way down to Christ, to show that he's the fulfillment of the promise, the seed of Abraham. Next bit, we have a lot of confusing names, so I'll try and pronounce them as best I can. Now it came to pass in the reign of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeba, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer, or however you say it, and in the 13th they rebelled. Now in the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings with him came and cut down the giants in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and strong nations with them, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites in the mountains of Seir, as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and cut down all the princes of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who dwelt in the Hazazon Tamar. Now the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim against Kedorlaomer, king of Elam. Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell in there, but those left fled to the mountains. Then they took all the cavalry of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So, some of these names are incredible, well, all of them, but some of these names are incredibly important, and they will come up later. So I'll just mention some of them briefly. So obviously Sodom and Gomorrah will feature in just a few chapters. The Amalekites and the Amorites were people who became great enemies of Israel later on, to the point where God actually commanded that they be wiped out. But the main gist of what I want to convey here is, and which is what the fathers explain, is that notice how Lot has gone to Sodom, to that land which he thought was appealing visually, and he's now been caught up in a war and has essentially been kidnapped. And the fathers say the same thing happens to us when we sin. One sin leads to another. When we keep company with people of sin, they drag us into their dirt and into their mire, and so we end up in similar situations to them. So there's a very important spiritual lesson to be learned here. Then one who escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who at that time dwelt by the oak of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Anna, and they were allies with Abram. The Abraham and all these people at this time were just nomadic peoples, basically living in tents, and so everybody sort of they were like pirates and tribes, and just allying with each other. Now when Abram heard his brother Lot was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants, born in his own house, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. The 318 is interestingly significant because when we have the feast where we commemorate the bishops of the First Ecumenical Council, the hymns draw on the number 318 here in Genesis and compare it with the 318 bishops that were present at the First Ecumenical Council. And the symbolism, or if you like, is that the 318 soldiers went out to fight against the enemies of Abraham, whereas the 318 bishops of the council fought against the heresy of Arius. And so if you listen to the hymns on the feast of the Fathers of the First Ecumenical Council, you'll hear they draw on this theme. Now when so he's now gone out in pursuit of them. So he divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked and pursued them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. So he brought back all the cavalry of Sodom, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. Then the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley, after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, and the kings with him. Now Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. He blessed Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hands." Then Abram gave him a tithe of all. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the people and keep the cavalry for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have raised my hand to God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing of yours from a thread to a sandal strap, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only that the young men have eaten, and the portion of men with me, Anah, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion." So here we have the pretty famous episode of Melchizedek. So amongst the fathers there are different views as to who Melchizedek was, in terms of, was he a theophany, as in was he an appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ, or was he simply a type and a figure of Christ? Both views are present amongst the fathers. For many years I personally thought that it was a theophany, for various reasons which I won't go into because my opinion has changed. And so I will tell you the opinion that I think is most correct, is that he was a type. One of the reasons is there is a passage in the Evergetinos. The Evergetinos is basically a book that contains stories and sayings of the Desert Fathers. And in English you can buy it online. It's in 4 volumes. It's a bit pricey, but it's worth it, and I think everybody should read it as part of their spiritual reading. Certainly before you move on to bigger things like the Philokalia and such, because it's more practical rather than mystical. The Philokalia is essentially impossible to understand without some form of advance in the spiritual life. Let's put it that way. There is a passage in the Euergetinos where there was a monk who believed that Melchizedek was a theophany. He believed that this was Christ. He believed that it was God, based upon various things he'd read. And this was told to the local bishop, who I can't remember who it was, but it was a saint. And the saint said that this was incorrect. And so he asked for this monk to be brought to him. And this monk came, and he saw the saintly bishop saw that this monk was very simple and didn't make this error from out of some sort of heresy or any sort of malicious view. And so he asked him, why do you think this? And he said, oh, well, I read that that Melchizedek was Christ because of this and because of that. And so he said, well, do something for me, Father, because I also hold this opinion, even though he didn't. And he said, please go and pray for me and ask God to reveal to you who Melchizedek was. And so he said, okay, yeah, I'll do that, in his holy innocence. And so the monk went away for a few days, and he prayed and fasted and asked God to reveal the issue to him. And the monk returned to the bishop, saint who I can't remember, and said, no, I was wrong. Melchizedek was just a man, but he was a type of Christ. And he said, well, how did you know this? And he said, well, after I prayed and fasted about it, I had a vision, and I think he said an angel presented me with all of the patriarchs and everybody of the Old Testament. He brought to me Adam, he brought to me Noah, he brought to me all of these people, and told me who they were. And he then brought Melchizedek to me and said Melchizedek was a human being who was a king and a priest, and so it was through this revelation that this monk found out that Melchizedek was not a theophany, and was not an appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ, but was just a type. The fathers that mentioned that he was a type of people like St. John Chrysostom, so some of the greatest of the commentators. And of course, so what we know about Melchizedek, firstly his name. The name Melchizedek in Hebrew means King of Righteousness. And he's also given the title King of Salem. Salem is Salem or Shalem, which is Shalom. It's the same word in Hebrew. It's just a different way of. It's the root of the word. And the kingdom of peace. The kingdom of peace is Jerusalem. So he's essentially called, with his name, he's called King of Righteousness, the King of Jerusalem. And he's also told to us he's not only a king, but he's a priest of the Most High God. And so we see he embodies two offices, the office of king and the office of priest, which of course Christ also embodies. He's a king, he's the king of the kingdom of heaven and of everything that exists, and he's also the great high priest, because he's the one, essentially, because he's the one who offers the sacrifice, and he's the one, as the prayer says that the priest says in the liturgy. Say it again. You are the one who offers and is offered, O Christ our God. Thou art the one who is offered, and thou art the one who offers and is offered, O Christ our God. And so he's the one who offers the sacrifice, and he's the one, and that sacrifice is himself. So Christ is the high priest par excellence. And also And of course, Abraham, of course, gives him a tithe. And St. Paul picks up on all this in his letter to the Hebrews, which we will now look at the relevant section. St. Paul, he says, "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a 10th part of all," so he tithed, first being translated King of Righteousness, his name, and then also King of Salem, meaning King of Peace. And he's one of the only people this is one of the things St. Paul picks up on, he's one of the only people in the Old Testament where a genealogy is not mentioned for him, as in no mother, no father, nothing. And so St. Paul says, "Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually." And so the fact that Melchizedek never has a genealogy mentioned, where he came from or whatever, and that he is a priest, this typifies the priesthood of Christ, which is eternal, which we also see in the Psalms. "Thou art a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek," speaking prophetically about the Messiah's office, that he will be an eternal priest after the order of Melchizedek, who was without beginning or end of days, as St. Paul says. And so why is it significant that Abraham gives a tithe to him rather than the other way around? Because, as St. Paul says, Abraham was the father of the Levitical priesthood, of the Levites. It was from the loins of Abraham, as St. Paul puts it, that the Levitical priesthood came. And all the people of Israel, all of the tribes, had to give tithes to the Levites, because the Levites were the only tribe that weren't given land when Israel inherited the promised land. The Levites were the only tribe that didn't get anything, and it was because they were the people of the temple, and so everybody else had to support them, essentially. And so the fact that Abraham, who is the father of the Levitical priesthood, gives tithes to Melchizedek, shows that Melchizedek's priesthood is superior to the Levitical priesthood. And so this is what so Melchizedek is a type of Christ's priesthood, in essence, if that makes sense. And anyway, I will actually do I think I'll take a break and do a Bible study actually for to do the Psalm 110, the Melchizedek one, because it's used a lot throughout the Christmas services and the services leading up to Christmas. But anyway, so I've blabbered on a bit on that, and having not prepared much, and so now I will just take a detour and we will talk a little bit about the feast coming up on Friday, which icon is up here. It's the feast of the entrance of the Mother of God into the temple. And it's a relatively ancient feast in the church. I think the first time we know of it mentioned in writing is about the 7th century, or a bit before the 7th century, which is actually quite late in compared to other feasts. But anyway, and it was when the Mother of God was presented by her parents, Joachim and Anna, into the temple when she was 3 years old. And so previously, basically a lot of the traditions that we know about the Mother of God, and a lot of the iconographic traditions regarding her and the hymnography regarding her is, I wouldn't say drawn from, because I don't like the term, but some people will say drawn from an apocryphal text called the Proto-Evangelium of James. I don't like it when people say that it's been drawn from it, because it's not really that way round. It's more the fact that the Proto-Evangelium of James contains in writing a lot of the traditions that the church held regarding the Mother of God. And so, like, if you read a lot of the church fathers around that time and a bit after, they mention all of these traditions, and they don't reference, the Proto-Evangelium of James. They just mention them as traditions that were known by the church. So a lot of it is drawn from, in parentheses, that text. But so what had previously happened prior to this feast is, of course, Saint Anna and Saint Joachim had been without a child in their old age, which is common in Scripture. Abraham and Sarah and other people, and so they prayed to God to grant them a child, and Saint Joachim retreated into the wilderness with his sheep, and there he spent much time in prayer to God. And Saint Anna went into her garden and did the same, and the angel Gabriel comes and tells them that they will have a child who will basically change the course of history. And of course that is the Theotokos, but the Mother of God, because without her, salvation wouldn't have entered into the world. And when they dedicated her to God from the beginning, and so it was decided that when she became 3 years old, that she would enter the temple, and she would be presented into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, and received by the high priest Zachariah, who was of course the father of St. John the Baptist, later would become the father of St. John the Baptist. And she dwelt in the Holy of Holies, which you can see up on the pillar there, which this is not an accurate depiction of the temple in Jerusalem. The Holy of Holies wasn't like a tower on top of the temple. This is just so you can fit everything into the icon. And she dwelt. Why did she dwell there? Well, because she was the new Ark of the Covenant, and the original Ark of the Covenant wasn't even in the Holy of Holies at this point. It had been lost in the time of the prophet Jeremiah. And so it was fitting that the old ark was no longer there, and the new ark was now dwelling in the Holy of Holies. And she was raised there until she was about 12 years old. And she was fed by the hands of an angel. And Zechariah used to go and to see if she needed food, and found that she had already been miraculously fed by manna from heaven. And what do we mean when we say that she's the Ark of the New Covenant? Well, if we think about what was the old Ark of the Covenant, the old Ark of the Covenant was where God was present with his people. And it was the Ark of the Covenant, which was you've seen, I'm sure, drawings or whatever of, was this golden box, and it contained three things. It contained the tablets of the law given to Moses, and it also contained the rod of Aaron, the first priest, and a jar of manna, which the manna with which God had fed the Israelites in the wilderness. And so when Christ becomes incarnate in the womb of the Mother of God, she becomes the new ark, because just as in the old ark there was the word of God on the tablets of the law, now Christ is of course the word of God. The rod of Aaron was a symbol of the priesthood. Christ is the high priest. And the manna, the jar of manna, was heavenly bread, as it's spoken of in the Old Testament, came down from heaven to feed the Israelites, and Christ, as he says, is the bread which came down from heaven. And so that's how Mary is the Ark of the Covenant typified the Virgin Mary. And so the feast is basically this celebration of her entry into the temple. And weirdly enough, which many of you probably heard me speak about this before, but I'll mention it because it's interesting, is this story of Mary being fed in the temple by the angel dwelling in the Holy of Holies is even in the Quran. And why is it there? Well, you tell me, why is it there? Because the point of the story was to show that she's the Ark of the New Covenant, and which would logically mean that Christ is God. But the Muslims don't believe that she's the Ark of the Covenant, the new Ark of the Covenant, or the Mother of God, and so the story is just put in there for a laugh. Anyway, there's lots of stories like that, and I just find it interesting, so I thought I'd mention it. Any questions? One second. Let him get the thing.
Yeah, so you say that Abraham gave his tithe to Melchizedek. How is his priesthood distinct from the Levitical priesthood?
Because Melchizedek is mentioned without genealogy for a start.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it's as if it's in some sense eternal, as in it's and so, as in who gave it to him.
Okay, and that's also part of the reason why some people say that it was like an epiphany.
Yeah, some people say he was a theophany because some people say he was a theophany because he comes out of nowhere. You know, he's got no genealogy. He basically seems to be like Christ in every way. And so they were saying, well, is it an appearance of Christ, like the other appearances of Christ in the Old Testament, as the angel of the Lord and the word of the Lord, etc.? It's quite compelling. I just think there's too much against it. So I think, yeah.
Would it be fair to say that regarding Melchizedek, since he met Abraham in Genesis 14, if it was Christ, it should have been easily recognized in Genesis 18 when the Lord appeared to Abraham?
Why?
Oh, I don't think, yeah. Because if it's the same person and you've seen him like before, and if you see him again,
yeah, but it might be different It might be different appearances. Like so. Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Like so when. Yeah, I suppose that. Yeah, but does the word of the Lord or the angel of the Lord appear the same every single time to the people? That's true. I don't know. Yeah. Of course, the other thing I forgot to mention, which was I don't know why it went out of my head, was of course Melchizedek comes and blesses Abraham with bread and wine, which is obvious, typifying the Eucharist, and so he's offering bread and
Regarding Sodom and Gomorrah, obviously we see that Sodom was appealing, more appealing to white people wanted to go there. And we know the relationship with Sodom, like with their homosexuality and all of that. Would it be fair to say that, is it that homosexual, I don't know, I'm making a correlation position like we disagree if not. Would it be fair to say that societies that are flourishing tend to be more sexually driven, and the sexual drive tend to be in the structure of the society?
I would say yes. And also there's something in the book of Ezekiel which, referring to Sodom and Gomorrah, says that they became like that because of too much. What's the word for too much? There's an excess of bread.
And the lack of charity.
Yeah, and the lack of charity. An excess, but what's an excess of bread? Wealth, food, lots of luxury to eat. And so when man becomes comfortable physically, spiritually comfortable. It sits back around. The passions have a breeding ground, and so we see that in the world. So countries that have the most degeneracy are usually the richer countries.
I'm reading this book. I was reading this book. If you go to Fifth Turning, it talks about the generation of heavens every 20 years or so. And they emphasize that a strong society, a strong man society, build good flourishing. Strong men build good society. Weak men build bad society, which then build strong men. So I can see how a society that seems to be easy and flourishing will allow them to be like sexually driven.
Even in our spiritual lives, when we become complacent, when we stop doing our prayers, when we start to relax our fasts, or even not even abolish our prayers completely. Let's say, you know what, I'm tired tonight, I'm going to do less of my prayer rule than I usually would. Or, you know what, I'm a little bit hungry today, so instead of doing my fast without oil, I'm going to do my fast with oil. Excuse me. When we start to become relaxed like this, the passions and the devil will smack us hard, because we've let our defences down, we've put the wall down, and so and it's the same. It's the same generally. People, they get comfortable. They have no money worries. They eat plenty of food. No wonder people become,
I think
like
that's
that.
That's how I translate, especially how you said it just now. It's how I translate why Lot's wife turned around. She was born there, and she knew the comfortability that she had, that she's turning away from the goal. So she was a child of such society. When she was told to do something outside of her comfort zone, she then turned around to see if she can salvage it.
And also the sin of Lot's wife is that it's like she turned back to look at sin, to look at the old life. Like Christ says, he says, no man having put his hand to the plough and turns back is fit for the kingdom of God. And that's whatever path we choose in the Christian life, whether we become monks or nuns, or whether we become married people or whatever, we must never, when we've made a decision like that, and when we focus on Christ, we mustn't look back, because then we're not, and then we become like Lot's wife. That's why Christ said, "Remember Lot's wife."
Is there also a parallel to be made that, like we said, was unknown, and Christ also would have been expected to come from the line of the Levite of Judah, being if he was to be
Christ was from the line.
priest.
Christ was from the tribe of Judah, the kingly tribe.
So,
But he didn't need to be from the Levitical tribe to be a priest, because he had a different type of priesthood. As in the order of Melchizedek. Yeah, say something if you want.
I want to see the general point of Christ's priesthood is that it doesn't follow the rules or the standards that were put on the Levitical priesthood. So when we look at the Old Testament, as the Father said, we are supposed to be able to track exactly every single Levite and where they get their sacerdotal power or rights from. I got it from this father who goes back to Levi. Whereas with Melchizedek, we don't know where he came from at all. So this is why Paul emphasizes not just the genealogy, but even beginning of days or end of life. We don't know what he did, we don't know how he was born or anything. With Christ, it's similar in the sense that he came from the tribe of Judah to be the king, but his priesthood does not come from any sort of man in this world, but it is his particular priesthood, which is why it's in the order of Melchizedek. He answers to no one but God.
And the New Testament priesthood, like our priesthood, it's the priesthood of Christ, and it's because there was a change of covenants. The change of covenants comes with a change of priesthood. And so the Old Testament priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, it was by blood, by I forget my words when I'm talking publicly. It was biologically, you come from the Levitical, you come from the Levitical tribe, so you're a priest. The priesthood of Christ, the priesthood of Christ now, which is the Melchizedek priesthood, if you like, the priesthood of Christ is different, and so it's given differently. It's given by succession, laying on of hands, etc.
Yeah, just to add on to that, correct me if I'm wrong, it is said that, especially in the Old Testament, like a priest's priesthood ends when he dies, and the fact that Melchizedek didn't have a genealogy to track when he died or so shows that his priesthood was everlasting or going on, because we don't know if he died or not.
Yeah.
That's why Christ was able to jump on, come from Melchizedek.
Yeah. And Christ being eternal is the eternal high priest. There's actually a really nice icon, which is, I think the original is at the Hamatura Monastery in Lebanon, and it's based on the prayer that I mentioned from the cherubic hymn prayer that the priest says. It says, "Thou art the one who offers and is offered, Christ our God," and it's Christ as the high priest, offering himself as the sacrificial victim. Yeah, it's a really nice icon. I'll find it and I'll show it to you guys afterwards. But yeah.
Cool fact is that one thing is that Melchizedek's name means priest king, so Melech meaning king, and then Zedek meaning priest.
Yeah,
So,
and king of righteousness as well.
Yeah,
Zedek.
exactly.
Zedek means righteous. Yeah.
So when putting those things together, even the name of Melchizedek has nothing to do with it's not like a person in the sense that, your name is Andrew, or your name is Ambrosius, for example. His name already has this typological meaning that's been put into it already to serve as this person, which is why when Paul says he's made like the Son of God, it's supposed to represent this particular idea as well.
So it's his whole identity, it doesn't have anything in his name to
Yeah.
who his family is. Or
Everything's been constructed to fit this purpose for him, and he submits to that, which is why it's the same.
Okay. Σώσον Κύριε των λαών σου και ευλογήσον την κληρονομίαν σου, νίκας της ευσεβεύσιν κατά βαρβάρων δωρούμενος και των σων φυλάτων δια του σταυρού σου πολιτεύμα. Through the prayers of our holy fathers and mothers, O Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.